He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He did not even show anger. Yet, the moment Don Vito Corleone stepped into that room, the fate of its owner was already sealed. Disrespect is often loud. Power, however, rarely is. And no one understood this better than the man whose presence alone could silence an entire room without a single command. This is not a story about violence. It is a story about control, about restraint, and about how true authority reveals itself when chaos expects a reaction and receives calm instead. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect and leave a comment. Have you ever witnessed someone lose everything, not because of what they did, but because of how they underestimated another person? And if stories that reveal the hidden psychology behind power, honor, and legacy interest you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. The room was meant to intimidate. Expensive furniture, polished wood, men positioned carefully along the walls, everything designed to remind visitors who held control in that space. The owner believed that wealth and posture were enough to command respect. He believed that arrogance could substitute wisdom. That belief would cost him dearly. Don Vito entered without spectacle, no dramatic pause, no grand announcement. He acknowledged no one at first, not out of disrespect, but out of certainty. His calm was not indifference, it was calculation. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. He observed the room the way a chess master studies the board, already seeing several moves ahead. The owner spoke first. His tone was casual, bordering on dismissive. He believed he was setting the terms. He believed Don Vito was just another man seeking a favor, another figure who could be pressured, rushed, or subtly humiliated. The mistake was not the words themselves, but the assumption behind them, that power needed to be proven loudly. Don Vito listened. This silence unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. Silence forces others to fill the void, and in doing so, they often reveal weakness. The owner continued talking, explaining terms, conditions, boundaries, all the things men say when they are trying to assert dominance rather than embody it. Then Don Vito spoke. Not immediately. He adjusted his posture first, resting his hands calmly, as if the conversation had finally reached a point worthy of his attention. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost courteous. That softness carried weight, because it was not an attempt to persuade. It was a statement of reality. He did not accuse the owner of disrespect. He did not threaten consequences. Instead, he spoke of principles, of how respect is not demanded, but earned, of how men who forget this often confuse temporary advantage with lasting power. Each sentence landed quietly, but together they formed an unavoidable truth. The owner laughed. That laugh marked the moment everything shifted, because Don Vito did not react to it. No change in expression, no tightening of the jaw, no warning glance to his men. His calm did not crack, and that was precisely what terrified those who understood him. Calm in his world was never a sign of weakness. It was the final confirmation that a decision had already been made. He explained patiently that insults do not offend him. They educate him. They reveal who a man truly is when he believes himself untouchable. And once revealed, such men become predictable. Predictability, to Don Vito, was the most dangerous flaw of all. The owner still believed the conversation could be salvaged. He leaned forward, offered compromises, softened his tone. But respect, once denied, cannot be retroactively granted. Don Vito accepted the words without accepting their intention. He stood slowly, signaling the end of the meeting without declaring it. His final words were not a curse nor a threat. They were advice, the kind given too late to matter. As he walked toward the door, the room remained silent, heavy with an understanding few dared to voice. Nothing violent had happened, yet everything had changed. The owner did not lose his fate in that moment. He revealed it. And what followed would prove that the most irreversible decisions are often made in complete silence. The consequences did not arrive immediately, and that delay was intentional. Don Vito believed that punishment delivered too quickly was emotional, not strategic. True power allowed time to work on a man's mind, to let fear grow in the empty spaces where certainty once lived. The owner returned to his routines that same evening, convincing himself that the meeting had ended without damage. No raised voices, no threats, no visible retaliation. In his world, danger was always loud. Silence felt like safety. But silence, when wielded by someone like Don Vito Corleone, was never empty. In the days that followed, small disruptions began to appear. Subtle at first, a shipment delayed without explanation, a supplier suddenly unavailable, a contract renegotiated by a third party who now seemed oddly distant. None of these events were dramatic enough to trigger alarm, yet together they formed a pattern that gnawed at the owner's confidence. He made calls. Doors that once opened effortlessly now required patience. Some never opened at all. Men who previously spoke with familiarity responded with formality, or worse, with hesitation. Respect had quietly shifted direction, flowing away from him toward an authority that no longer needed to announce itself. Don Vito had done nothing publicly. That was the brilliance of it. By refusing spectacle, he denied the owner a clear enemy to confront. There was no confrontation to rally against, no accusation to defend himself from, only the growing realization that influence had been withdrawn, not stolen, but reassigned. At night, the owner replayed the meeting in his mind. He searched for the moment where he might have crossed a line. He convinced himself that laughter had been harmless, that confidence had been mistaken for strength. Yet deep down an uncomfortable truth began to surface. He had spoken as if Don Vito needed him. That assumption was the insult. In Don Vito's world, dependency determined hierarchy. Those who believed themselves indispensable were often the first to be replaced. Meanwhile, Don Vito moved with the same calm he always had. His days continued uninterrupted, his routines unchanged. This was not vengeance driven by emotion. It was correction, a realignment of balance. He did not seek to destroy the owner immediately. Destruction was inefficient. What he sought was understanding. Understanding arrives faster when options disappear. Soon, competitors sensed opportunity. They approached the owner with offers that seemed generous but carried hidden costs. They knew he was exposed, even if he did not yet fully accept it. Power attracts opportunists the moment it shows vulnerability. And vulnerability, once visible, invites pressure from all sides. The owner finally requested another meeting. This time his tone was different, respectful, careful. He spoke as if walking across thin ice, aware that one wrong word could send everything collapsing beneath him. Don Vito listened again, unchanged, his expression calm, almost sympathetic. Sympathy, however, was not forgiveness. The owner apologized, indirectly. He framed his words as misunderstandings, cultural differences, misread intentions. He offered concessions, partnerships, assurances. Everything he believed might restore what he had lost. Don Vito responded with silence. That silence stretched longer than the first, not as a tactic, but as a mirror. It forced the owner to confront the imbalance himself. Eventually, Don Vito spoke, explaining that respect offered under pressure is not respect at all. It is survival. And survival, while admirable, does not restore honor. He explained that power built on intimidation collapses the moment intimidation fails. Power built on trust, however, survives even absence. The owner listened, not as an equal now, but as a man being educated on rules he had ignored. Don Vito made no demands. He offered no second chance. He simply clarified how the world actually worked and allowed the owner to draw his own conclusions. This restraint was deliberate. A man forced into submission may rebel. A man who recognizes his mistake carries it forever. When the meeting ended, there was no handshake. The owner left knowing that his fate was no longer in his control, yet not because Don Vito had taken it, because he had squandered it himself. In the quiet aftermath, one truth became unavoidable. Disrespect does not provoke immediate retaliation from the powerful. It disqualifies the offender from future protection. And without protection, the world shows no mercy. As the balance of influence continued to shift, events began aligning toward an outcome no apology could prevent, setting the stage for a conclusion that would redefine the meaning of consequence itself. From that point forward, the owner was no longer reacting to isolated problems. He was facing a collapse of structure. Businesses do not fall apart overnight. They erode when confidence disappears. Employees sensed instability. Partners questioned long-term viability. Even rivals who once feared crossing invisible lines now tested boundaries that no longer seemed enforced. What frightened the owner most was not the losses themselves, but the absence of a clear cause. There was no single enemy to blame, no dramatic betrayal to point to. Everything unraveled quietly, as if the world had collectively agreed to move on without him. Don Vito understood this dynamic better than anyone. Influence, once withdrawn, creates a vacuum, and vacuums are always filled, not by those who deserve it most, but by those who move fast. He allowed others to step forward, to claim territory, to expose themselves. In doing so, he maintained distance, preserving his image as a man above petty conflict. The owner attempted to adapt. He hardened his posture, raised his voice, demanded loyalty. But authority borrowed from fear only works when fear is credible. His was not. Men obeyed out of habit, not conviction, and habits fade quickly when alternatives appear. Late one evening, a longtime associate visited him privately. The conversation was uncomfortable, stripped of pretense. The associate explained that alignment with Don Vito had quietly shifted away from the owner. Not as punishment, but as inevitability. Stability had found a new center. The owner finally understood the depth of his mistake. He had mistaken proximity to power for possession of it. Don Vito never corrected that assumption, because men who misunderstand power reveal their limits without assistance. Desperation led the owner to contemplate actions he once dismissed as beneath him. Rash alliances, risky deals, short-term gains that promised immediate relief. Each choice pushed him further from recovery. The more aggressively he fought the tide, the faster it pulled him under. Meanwhile, Don Vito addressed the situation indirectly. He spoke to others about balance, about maintaining order, about protecting what sustains families rather than egos. His words were not about the owner, yet everyone understood the reference. Leadership in his hands was never personal, it was structural. One afternoon, news reached the owner that a critical opportunity had vanished. A deal he had relied on for survival was now being handled by another party. No explanation, no apology, just absence. That absence carried a message clearer than any confrontation could. He requested one final audience. This time, the meeting took place in Don Vito's space. The contrast was immediate. No excess, no intimidation, just calm order. The owner arrived early, uncertain, aware that he was no longer negotiating from strength. When Don Vito entered, he acknowledged him politely, as one would acknowledge any man. That equality, paradoxically, felt more devastating than contempt. It confirmed that the owner no longer mattered enough to be opposed. The owner spoke plainly now. He admitted fault without excuses. He asked not for restoration of power, but for survival. This honesty, though late, was genuine. Don Vito listened, his expression unchanged. He responded carefully, explaining that mercy and protection are not the same thing. Mercy spares a man's life. Protection preserves his influence. The owner, he said, had already chosen which he would lose. He offered guidance, not intervention, advice on how to withdraw with dignity, how to minimize damage, how to avoid complete ruin. This was not generosity, it was consistency. Don Vito did not destroy men who learned their lesson. He simply did not rebuild what they had broken. The owner left knowing the truth he had avoided from the beginning. Fate is rarely imposed, it is usually permitted. And as events moved toward their inevitable conclusion, it became clear that the calm response in that first room had not merely changed the owner's future, it had defined it. The withdrawal was slow, almost ceremonial. The owner began stepping back from positions he once guarded obsessively. Publicly, it appeared as a strategic reorganization. Privately, it was survival. He sold interests quietly, delegated authority, reduced visibility. Each move was an admission that the era he believed permanent had already ended. Don Vito observed from a distance. He neither accelerated nor obstructed the process. Interference would have suggested emotion, and emotion would have diminished the lesson. The system was correcting itself, and he allowed it to do so naturally. What remained of the owner's influence fractured into smaller, manageable pieces, absorbed by others who understood the unspoken rules better. These men did not celebrate his fall. They learned from it. In Don Vito's world, spectacle was for fools. Memory was for the wise. Time revealed the deeper consequence of that first moment of disrespect. It was not the loss of wealth or position that haunted the owner, but the realization that he had failed a fundamental test of character. He had been given an opportunity to recognize authority without being forced to acknowledge it. He had chosen pride instead. Pride, Don Vito believed, was the most expensive currency a man could spend. Years earlier, Don Vito had learned that power, unrestrained by principle, consumes itself. Violence draws attention. Attention attracts challengers. Challengers destabilize order. His calm response was not passive. It was preventative. By refusing escalation, he preserved structure, not just for himself but for everyone dependent on that structure. The owner, now removed from the center, began to see the world with painful clarity. Decisions he once made casually were now examined by others. Words he once spoke without consequence now carried none. He existed in the margins, safe but irrelevant. That irrelevance was the true cost. One evening, he encountered a former subordinate who now operated independently. Their conversation was respectful, even friendly. Yet beneath it lay an unspoken understanding. The hierarchy had reversed. The owner felt no resentment, only recognition. This was the natural order asserting itself. Don Vito, meanwhile, continued his life unchanged. He met with family, offered counsel, resolved disputes with the same measured patience. To those who knew him well, this episode was never about punishment. It was about preservation. A leader who tolerates disrespect invites chaos. A leader who responds with calculated calm reinforces order without creating enemies. The lesson spread quietly. Men adjusted their behavior not because they feared immediate retaliation, but because they understood the long-term cost of misjudgment. Respect became instinctive again, not enforced. As years passed, the owner's story became a reference point, not spoken aloud but understood. A reminder that fate can pivot on a single interaction, on a single choice to speak or remain silent, to listen or dismiss. Don Vito never referenced the incident. He had no need to. The outcome spoke for itself. His power endured not because he destroyed those who challenged it, but because he revealed the consequences of misunderstanding it. And yet, the final meaning of that encounter would not be fully understood until one last realization surfaced, one that reframed everything. That had happened and revealed why calm, above all else, had changed the owner's fate forever. The realization arrived quietly, without drama or revelation. The owner understood, at last, that Don Vito had never acted against him personally. That was the final truth, and the most unsettling one. There had been no vendetta, no emotional response to insult, no desire to humiliate. What occurred was simply the removal of protection from someone who had demonstrated he did not understand how power was meant to be handled. In that understanding, the owner found clarity. Fate had not turned against him. It had merely followed its natural course once Don Vito chose not to intervene on his behalf. And in Don Vito's world, intervention was the rarest form of loyalty. This was the essence of his authority. He did not dominate through constant force. He created environments where order sustained itself. His calm response in that room was not restraint, it was judgment. Judgment delivered without anger, without haste, without spectacle. Men often believe power is proven by reaction. Don Vito proved it through restraint. The owner spent his remaining years in relative peace. He retained enough to live comfortably, enough to avoid humiliation, enough to survive. But survival was not legacy. His name faded, replaced by others who understood the weight of responsibility that accompanies influence. History did not remember him as a villain or a victim. It barely remembered him at all. Don Vito, however, endured, not because he was feared, but because he was understood, even when men realized that understanding too late. His legacy was built on principles few could articulate, but many instinctively respected. Speak when necessary. Listen always. Decide calmly. Act only when the outcome preserves balance. The room where the disrespect began eventually changed ownership. New walls, new furniture, new ambitions, but the lesson remained embedded in the culture surrounding it. Power does not announce itself. It does not argue. It does not need validation. When challenged, it observes. When disrespected, it remembers. That first meeting was never about the owner's arrogance alone. It was a demonstration for everyone else watching, a reminder that calm is not the absence of action, but the highest form of control. Violence ends conversations. Calm defines futures. Don Vito Corleone understood that a man reveals his strength not by how loudly he responds to insult, but by how effortlessly he allows consequences to unfold. In a world addicted to noise, his silence was authority, and that is why, when he entered a room of disrespect and answered with calm, he did more than change one man's fate. He reinforced a truth that outlives empires. Honor sustains power, character sustains legacy, and the strongest men never need to prove who they are. They simply remain.